Taiwan under Qing rule refers to the rule of the Qing dynasty over Formosa and the Pescadores from 1683 to 1895. The Qing court sent an army led by General Shi Lang and annexed Taiwan in 1683. It was part of Fujian Province until the declaration of Fujian-Taiwan Province in 1887. Qing rule over Taiwan ended when Taiwan was ceded to Japan by the Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895. History. Following the death of Shang Jing in 1681, the Qing dynasty seized the advantage presented by the struggle for succession and dispatched the navy with Shi Lang at its head to destroy the Zhang fleet off the Penghu Islands. In 1683, following the Battle of Penghu, Qing troops landed in Taiwan. Shuang gave in to Qing demands for surrender, and his kingdom of Tungning was incorporated into the Qing Empire as part of Fujian Province, thereby ending 2 decades of rule by the Zhang family. The Kangxi Emperor of the Qing dynasty annexed Taiwan to remove any threat to his dynasty from remaining resistance forces on the island. However, Qing authorities did not want to develop Taiwan over aggressively, as this might have encouraged potential resistance's force to build a base there. Accordingly, the early Qing dynasty initially ruled Taiwan passively as part of Fujian, until work began to create a separate province in 1885. Gwee Rebellion. In 1721, a Hakka Fujianese rebellion led by Gwee captured Taiwan Fu and briefly established a government reminiscent of the Ming dynasty. In the immediate aftermath of Gwee Rebellion, the desire to open up new land for cultivation saw government encouraging the expansion of Han Chinese migration to other areas of the island. For instance, the population in the Tamsui area had grown to the point where the government needed an administrative center there. In addition to a military outpost, the government tried to build a center with local Aboriginal corvée labor, but treated them more like slaves and finally provoked an uprising. Aboriginal groups split the loyalties. Most joined the uprising. Some remained loyal to the king, perhaps because they had pre-existing feuds with the other groups. The Aboriginal revolt was put down within a few months with the arrival of additional troops. Lin Shuang Rebellion. The Lin Shuang Rebellion occurred in 1787 to 1788. Lin, who was an immigrant from Zhangzhou, had come to Taiwan with his father in the 1770s. He was involved in the secret Heaven and Earth Society, whose origins are not clear. Lin's father was detained by the local authorities, perhaps in suspicion of his activities with the society. Lin Shuang then organized the rest of the society members in a revolt in an attempt to free his father. There was initial success in pushing government forces out of Lin's home base in Changhua. His allies did likewise in Tamsui. By this point, the fighting was drawing in Zhangzhou people beyond just the society members, and activating the old feuds. This brought out Quanzhou networks on behalf of the government. Eventually, the government sent sufficient force to restore order. Lin Shuang was executed and the Heaven and Earth Society was dispersed to mainland China, or sent into hiding. But there was no way to eliminate ill will between Zhangzhou, Quanzhou, and Hakka networks, though they never again were serious to push out the government or encompass the whole island. Feuds went on sporadically for most of the 19th century, only started coming to an end in the 1860s. There were more than 100 rebellions during the early Qing. The frequency of rebellions, riots, and civil strife in Qing Taiwan is evoked by the common saying, every 3 years an uprising, every 5 years a rebellion. First Opium War. Some British and Americans advocated the annexation of Taiwan. In 1841, during the First Opium War in the Battle of Keelung, the British attempted to attack in failed efforts 3 times against Keelung on the northeast coast of Taiwan under Qing rule. The ventures to seize Sodacan and Shi Lang by the British failed. The successful defense was directed by Liao Ying, who led the Chinese naval forces on Taiwan. On Taiwan, some British were taken as prisoners by the Taotai Liao Ying and interrogated for information on the West. Indian and European crew members of the Nabudda, a British ship, were captured on Taiwan after being abandoned by the British officers and were executed by local Qing officials. Portuguese, Indian, American, and European crew members of the An, another British ship, were shipwrecked in Tamsui's vicinity in March 1842, captured, and then executed by the Chinese. At Tainan, 197 of the Nabudda and An's crew were killed, and due to causes related to imprisonment 87 others died. Aboriginal attacks on foreign ships. The Aboriginals often slaughtered the shipwrecked crews of Western ships. In 1867, the entire American crew of the Rover were massacred by Aboriginals in the Rover incident. When the Americans launched the punitive Formosa expedition in retaliation, the Aboriginals defeated the Americans and forced them to retreat, killing an American Marine while suffering no casualties themselves. In the Muden incident, Aboriginals slaughtered 54 Rokuan sailors, which led to the Japanese invasion of Taiwan against the Aboriginals. Sino French War. During the Sino French War, the French attempted an invasion of Taiwan during the Shi Lang campaign. Looming Shuang, who was leading the defense of Taiwan, recruited Aboriginals to serve alongside the Chinese government soldiers and Hakka militia in fighting against the French. The French were defeated at the Battle of Tamsui, and the Qing forces pinned the French down at Shi Lang in an 8-month-long campaign before the French withdrew. The Hakka used the privately owned muskets instead of modern Western rifles. Qing policy on Taiwan. Qing had three main policies relating to the governance of Taiwan. The first policy was to restrict the qualification and number of migrants who were allowed to cross the Taiwan Strait and settle in Taiwan. This was to prevent a rapid growth in population. The second policy was to restrict Han Chinese from entering the mountain area, which was mainly settled by indigenous Taiwanese peoples. This policy was to prevent conflict between the two groups. The third was to apply different tax policies for Han immigrants and Aboriginal people. The colonial government first sold farming rights of land to urban businessmen, and then these rights owners would rent out portions of the land to individual farm laborers from the mainland. Because of the high population from Fujian Province, demand for land was high, and therefore rents were also high, and migrant laborers usually didn't make much profit. For Aboriginal groups, tax farmers were used. The government recognized Aboriginal rights to land, but per village tax was also imposed. The tax was not paid directly, but by merchants who were buying the right to collect taxes for themselves. The tax farmers, and their interpreters and foremen, were known to be corrupt and commit abuses, especially against Aborigines. Besides, corvée labor was included. The result seemed good, since the tax policies made convenient revenue for the government, landowners, tax farmers. Yet Han and Aboriginal people were struggling. The Taiwanese Plains Aborigines adopted Han customs. Despite the restrictions, the population of Han Chinese in Taiwan grew rapidly from 100,000 to 2,500,000, while the population of Taiwanese Aborigines shrank. The restrictions on mainland Chinese residents migrating to Taiwan stipulated that no family members could accompany the migrant. Therefore, most migrant migrants were mostly single men or married men with wives remaining on mainland China. Most early male migrants to Taiwan would choose to marry the indigenous women. Accordingly, there was a saying which stated that there were Tangshan men, but no Tangshan women. The Han people frequently occupied the indigenous land or conducted illegal business with the indigenous peoples, so conflicts often happened. During that time, the Qing government was not interested in managing this matter. It simply drew the borders and closed up the mountain area so they could segregate the two groups. It also implemented a policy which assumed that the indigenous peoples would understand the law as much as the Han Chinese. So when conflicts arose, the indigenous peoples tended to be judged unfairly. Accordingly, indigenous land were often taken through both legal and illegal methods. Sometimes the Han Chinese even used intermarriage as an excuse to occupy land. Many people crossed the maintained borders to farm and to conduct business, and conflicts frequently arose. Around 1890, Governor Shuang declared that an aggregate population of 88,000 savages had submitted to imperial rule. Quote, "This was only part of a broad action by the Qing government against southern Aboriginal tribes in China." Development. The Han people occupied most of the plains and developed good agricultural systems and prosperous commerce, and consequently transformed the plains of Taiwan into a Han-like society. Taiwan had a strong agricultural sector in the economy, while the coastal provinces of mainland China had a strong handcrafting sector. The trade between the two regions prospered, and many cities in Taiwan such as Tainan, Lukang, and Taipei became important trading ports. After the 1884–1885 Sino French War, the Qing government realized the strategic importance of Taiwan in relation to trade and geographical location, and therefore began to try to rapidly develop Taiwan. In 1887, the island became Taiwan Province, and Lu Mingxuan was appointed as the first governor. Liu increased the administrative regions in Taiwan to tighten control and to reduce crime. He implemented land reform and simplified land management. As a result of the land reform, the taxation received by the government increased by more than threefold. He also developed the mountain area to promote harmony between the Han Chinese and the indigenous Taiwanese peoples. However, modernization of Taiwan was Liu's main achievement. He encouraged the use of machinery and built-in military defense infrastructure. He also improved the road and rail systems. In 1887, he started building the first Chinese-built railway. In 1888, he opened the first post office in Taiwan, which was also the first in China. Taiwan was then considered the most developed province in China. However, Liu resigned his post as governor in 1891, and most of the modernization projects initiated by him came to a halt shortly thereafter and were never restarted throughout the rest of the Qing reign over the island. In 1895, Taiwan was ceded to Japan by the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Westerners claimed that diseases like leprosy and malaria were present in Taiwan. Reaction of Taiwan to the Treaty of Shimonoseki. In an attempt to prevent Japanese rule, an independent Democratic Republic of Formosa was declared. This republic was short-lived as the Japanese quickly suppressed opposition. List of governors of the Taiwan Province. Bibliography. External links.